Hey everybody, and welcome to this very special hangout. Tonight's topic is Shark Week, and it's brought to you in partnership between the online Ocean Symposium and the Ocean Research Foundation. Tonight we are taking a break from the dueling programming of Shark Week and Shark Fest to chat with shark scientists and shark enthusiasts about what's important to them. I want to remind you all at home that during this broadcast you can actually ask questions of the entire panel through the Hangout tool. Just click that little Q&A button. But first off, let's dive right in. First off is Vicki from the Ocean Research Foundation. Welcome to the Hangout.
Hey there. How's it going?
Good. Great to have you aboard again. Can you tell the audience a little bit about the Ocean Research Foundation and what you've been up to?
Sure. So one of the things that we have been doing is expanding our volunteer base, which has been extremely helpful. Thanks to them, we've been able to really get ourselves prepared for a Shark Week. And so one thing we had done in the past is basically a Shark Week hangout to kick things off. And we did something this year called Elasmo Drinks. And so you can take a look at some of these pictures. We had some, can you see these pictures, by the way?
Yeah, actually I'm in the background there.
Okay, great, cool, I couldn't tell. But yeah, so we have these really great drinks specially made. We had a bunch of prizes donated from the Lost Coast Brewery because they have their shark beers. We had drinking games going on. You can see we had a lot of shark enthusiasts that came, and basically the reason why we wanted to do this and create a larger volunteer base is because we took a note from a group called Upwell, and they were really tracking the success of Shark Week and how many people get attracted to this. They created an image similar like this in the past, and so we wanted to do one as well to kind of direct people into what they could watch to support science and what they could be more careful of in case it was perhaps sensationalizing negative things. So Shark Fest is Nat Geo Wild's version, and we also did a little image for there too, and as you can see there's a lot more jaws on Shark Fest than Shark Week, so the attempts that Shark Week has been making to improve their programming seems to have been working. So that was one of the big things we've been doing.
That actually is a little surprising that there seems to be more scary jaw thingies on Shark Fest than Shark Week. I guess it definitely does tie into the fact that Shark Week is making bank on their promise to be more scientific. So tell me a little bit more about, your work, especially in regards to, I know that you do a lot of work with underserved communities and at-risk youth. What do these labels mean exactly, and why has this become a focus of yours?
Yeah, so underserved communities, at-risk students, really what this is just getting at is a demographic of people that aren't getting as many opportunities as other groups of people. And as a result of that, when you think about it as a student that goes to a school that doesn't have a lot of money probably isn't going to have a lot of opportunities for special programs and field trips. Growing up, I was considered an at-risk youth, which I always thought was a funny term because it's like I'm not standing off the edge of a cliff all the time. I don't really see what risk I'm at. But basically what I think is that when you don't have that stimulus, that motivation of why you should stay in school, you don't. And so that's how those, I think, labels kind of started to become more popularized. And because I was considered one of those students, I really wanted to get more involved in that. I started to do marine education out of college, but it was really just because of a job to get, as opposed to, really targeting that. But in doing that, I had a lot of people going like, oh, you should really talk about your background, or you're going to speak to some Latinos today, you should mention your ethnicity, or you're going to be talking to a lot of girls today, you should talk about what it's like to do your work as a woman. And I always thought that was sort of odd at first, but I'm realizing that it's because a lot of those students aren't seeing that, and I think the idea is that if they do see someone that they can relate to in those positions, perhaps they can realize that they're actually not very hard to attain. One of the other things that was bothering me about Shark Week, and I actually wrote an article, is this lack of diversity, even though I thought there was a lot of diversity. And so I'm going to try a screen share one more time so you can see this. So basically this is the article that I wrote for my school. And as you can see, last year they had this whole theme of Summer of the Shark. Yet there's groups like the Gills Club that do all this wonderful work. They have tons of women shark scientists, and yet we weren't really seeing any on screen. And so what I was pointing out is that when people were really upset with sort of the ridiculousness that Shark Week seemed to be getting at, people really spoke up. And now we have a third season of Alien Sharks and a lot more scientific content. And this is just going back to the more graphics that I saw. But then also, I just wanted to point out this picture. Let me see if I can click on it. So this is the Sharks International Conference that happened in South Africa. And the reason I like showing this picture is because you can just see it's shark experts are actually a really diverse group. And so it just seems a little odd that we, at the very least, aren't seeing more females on there. And so that's kind of where all that came around.
Huh. Very interesting, especially in regards to the diversity. Speaking about shark research, what is your research focus on, and what is the Pacific Shark Research Center?
Yeah, so the Pacific Shark Research Center, the name is kind of a misnomer because we actually study sharks from all over the world. In a moment, Paul will tell you way more about that. But not just sharks, we also study chondrichthyans, and so chondrichthyans are all sorts of animals with cartilaginous skeletons. That includes sharks, that includes rays, and that includes chimeras, which are also called ghost sharks. And our lab is led by Dave Ebert, and Dave Ebert is also going to be, or also was on Alien Sharks, and he's also one of the leading taxonomists. And so I kind of like that because every time people hear about a shark expert, even if you're a scientist, there's so many different backgrounds that we have. Some people consider themselves geneticists. Again, Dr. Ebert considers himself more of a taxonomist. I'd probably be more of like a behavioral ecologist. So a lot of diversity there, and our lab definitely reflects that.
Well, excellent. Well, thank you for speaking with us right now. We're going to move on a little bit just to talk to some of our other guests. In fact, since you mentioned him, next up is the founder of Shark University and the star of Discovery Channel's Alien Sharks, Paul. Paul Clerkin, welcome to the Hangout.
Hey, Andrew. Hey, thanks a lot. Thanks for having me back.
No, it was great having you last time. Really great to have you again this year. It turns out that you're working on some really great stuff this year as well as the work you've been doing. Just so people at home are aware, what work have you been doing? What research do you focus on?
Well, so I'm working on my master's with Vicky at the Pacific Shark Research Center. But so far I've been focusing on mostly just deep sea sharks, but also pretty much any weird shark, the less popular non-great white species. So a lot of it's taxonomy. We're finding new species, but also we do a lot of life history, age growth, and those kinds of projects.
All right, well, that's really fantastic stuff. Can you tell us a little bit about Shark University?
Oh, yeah, well, sure. So Shark University is my website that I try to put as much shark information up there as I can. So when I started studying at Moss, you know, I went from being really into sharks to trying to be a shark scientist. And it's kind of hard because a lot of the popular information, you know, at this point I already memorized. I've loved sharks since I was a kid. And so, you know, we know great whites breach and we know makos are fast, but I was trying to get more familiar with lantern sharks and cat sharks and things that I didn't really understand. Unfortunately, scientific literature is very specific and very dense, so I went from, you know, pretty just popular fun science to, you know, studying, trying to read a paper about the proteins in cat shark eyes, and it was really hard to find that kind of middle ground where you want to learn a lot more about sharks in depth, but you're not quite, ready to read about what kind of pigments, make up shark eyes or something like that. So I try to put as much information on there as I can that's interesting about shark species, shark research, and just shark life facts.
Interesting. So can you tell us a little bit about some other projects you're working on? Like, what is Explore Earth?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, as I'm sure you know, we know more about the surface of the moon than we do the depths of our ocean, which is why we came up with Explore Earth. So throughout the year, I go on a lot of trips to different countries, and I go to remote places, and I see a lot of strange sharks, fish, and invertebrates, all kinds of marine life. But I don't have any way to really look down into the ocean and get that data and share images with people. So Explore Earth is a project that we just started to try to make our own deep sea cameras, deep sea landers, and hopefully ROVs. And with this, when I go on these trips, a lot of the time I'm on commercial fishing vessels, and we have, it's very low tech, but if I can drop these things overboard, we can, for the first time, see these animals in their natural habitat, get some data on them, and I can, share these images and get people excited about some of these sharks that most people haven't heard of.
That's fantastic. I know that lantern sharks are, for me especially, just because of the bioluminescence, are very interesting. Speaking of, your shark research, and I mentioned before that you have been on, Discovery Shark Week, and in fact are one of the stars of Alien Sharks. Can you tell us about the last episode of Alien Sharks? I believe it aired the other night.
Yeah, it aired Monday night, and yeah, it was a lot of fun to be involved with this year. This year it was following three groups, David Grubbs and Dean Gruber. Sorry, the opposite way. Yeah, Dean Grubbs and David Gruber, and their projects. David Grubbs is working with, David Gruber is working with biofluorescence in cats and sharks. He's looking at swell sharks, and they take in light and they reflect this green light that they think is more in the shark's vision, so they can identify their own species opposed to other species. So that was really cool because you can see these patterns and you see really beautiful kind of bizarre images of sharks. And Dean Grubbs was working off of Florida on his boat, sampling a lot of deep sea sharks to see how the oil spill affected them. My project with David Ebert, we flew all the way to Taiwan to try to track down a megamouth, which are large, very interesting, rare sharks, and they're very, very rarely encountered. But a friend of ours had seen them in the fish markets off there, and so that's when we decided we had to get to Taiwan and do a little bit of snooping around and do some detective work. We found a captain who said that he encounters them as bycatch, and so we went out on his boat, found a large female, and we were able to tag her and release her. So it was really cool to be a part of, and it was a crazy life experience.
Fantastic. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that life experience. What was it like to be at sea so long? What was the crew like? What was the voyage like?
So this trip was actually it was kind of nice because it wasn't we didn't go over 24 hours. We would leave kind of around 2 to 4 and stay on the boat for about 16 hours. So it was tough because we're night owls. You'd have to go to sleep at 7 in the morning, wake up and go back to the dock and get on the boat. But it was nice to be able to sleep in a bed that's stationary and have a little bit of space, access to a shower and all that stuff. The crew was exceptionally nice. It was a small boat. It was 70 feet long, and it had one captain, 3 crew, and none of them spoke English. One of the researchers that was from Taiwan spoke English, and so he was our translator. But they were, really, really nice, just really happy, and amazingly happy to help. You wouldn't believe how nice these guys were. So we went out there, and we were sandwiched between 2 typhoons, and we had a very, very small window to try to catch a megamouth. And I was actually biting my nails the whole time because we came all this way, and I had my heart set on a megamouth. But we finally, when we got one, I just kind of just got into research mode. I didn't think about being like excited or scared or anything like that. I just jumped in, and it was a crazy experience. First of all, because he was a huge shark, and also it was a megamouth that came up from the depths. So the whole thing was kind of mind blowing.
That sounds fantastic. you know, I'm sure that everybody in the audience would love to hear more about all the work that you've done and all of the species that you've encountered. But I have to ask, tell us a little bit about what it was like to be on Sharks After Dark.
Oh yeah, so Shark After Dark was a little bit different format this year, so I wasn't really ready for it, but it was it was fine. I knew going in that they weren't going to be asking me a lot of hard science questions. The point is it's a kind of fun late night show, so going on there was I knew it wasn't going to be all about promoting shark biodiversity, but everybody on the show was so nice. Eli Roth was super awesome. Brandon was really, really nice, and the comedian Jesselnick was, he was really funny, even off screen. So, I wish I could have talked about, sharks a little bit more, but the experience was, was very nice.
Well, that sounds really nice, since you're describing it as very nice, but if you had a chance to talk a little bit more about sharks and your shark research on Sharks After Dark, what specifically would you have liked to have highlighted?
Oh, that's a very good question. Well, I love talking about sharks and shark biodiversity, so I think I would try to focus on, the fact that there are so many different species of sharks. Everybody thinks about great whites and shark attacks, but, if you think about it, most sharks are just not even in contact with humans. Half of all shark species are deep sea, and there are very, very few sharks actually implemented and the handful of shark attacks that happen. So, I'd like to try to promote the fact that sharks are amazingly diverse. They come in all different shapes, different sizes, they live everywhere, and they eat different things. And so I would like to spend a little bit of time, trying to get people excited about all the very, very interesting species of sharks that there are and how much we don't know about them. Definitely there's a lot of new species that we don't even know exist, but there's plenty of species that we're known from one specimen. We don't know how old they live, what they do. They're just complete mysteries, and it's fascinating and, in my opinion, very, very interesting.
Well, honestly, in my opinion, it's fascinating and interesting as well. I want to thank you for being on here, and for those of you watching at home, there are tons of ways that you can get involved and help support the work that Paul is doing, and we'll be sending out links a little bit later. Next, we have up marine biologist that is a leading expert when it comes to the behavior and ecology of sharks, Dr. Andy Nosal. Andy, welcome to the Hangout.
Hey, thanks very much for inviting me.
No problem. Really great to have you on here. I gave a very brief description of what you do. Can you tell us a little bit more about the research you work on?
So most of my research has to do with understanding the movement patterns of sharks and rays, and I focus mostly on local nearshore species of Southern California. And so I use a variety of tracking methods to follow them. So most of it's acoustic, but also satellite tags as well. And basically, I try to answer questions about the causes and consequences of these movement patterns. So what's causing them environmentally, physiologically, and then once we know what these sharks and rays are doing, how they're moving, what does that mean for community structure, for population dynamics, and even what are the conservation implications of that? So, so that's one part of my research, and that's the main part. And then the other part is a little bit more interdisciplinary. I have a big interest in the way that people perceive sharks as it relates to people's fear of sharks and willingness to conserve them. And so right now I'm just finishing up a study and getting ready to write it up, where we've been looking at the effect of background music in shark documentaries on the way that people perceive sharks. And in a nutshell, what we found is that, when you have this very scary Jaws-like music in the background, people see sharks very negatively. When we ask them, how certain words, how well do certain words describe sharks, words like scary and dangerous, those rate very highly. But then when we have very kind of majestic, uplifting music, like what you might see with dolphin footage, it's amazing how it changes. Now people are rating words like beautiful and intelligent very high. So that was really interesting.
It's funny that you mentioned that. Have you ever tried watching a horror movie without the sound?
Yeah, it's not so scary. I hate horror movies, and so that's probably the only way I can watch one.
There's actually a recent study done by another group that talked about how, if I can recall this correctly, they basically looked at the PSAs that went out with sharks and for Shark Week or shark documentaries to see how that affected people's fear. And apparently, even if you throw up a big old PSA, people are still going to get that trigger fear. And, you know, I'm wondering how that kind of dovetails into the research that you did.
Well, I mean, there's a whole field called marketing psychology, too. I mean, so music affects us in so many ways. You pointed out horror movies, but, you know, it's the music that you hear when you walk into a store, for example. It's not just random. It's chosen very specifically because it affects the way you shop. It affects your behavior and the way you feel. So it's not unreasonable to think that, you know, the kind of background music that we hear with shark footage will, you know, affect the way we perceive them as well. And ultimately, it could affect our behavior.
So I guess the next step would be to have shark programming that uses more of lullabies instead of, you know, shrills and freaky horror music.
Yeah, I would prefer that, but I guess I don't know what the effect on the ratings would be.
We'll have to see.
Yeah.
In addition to the work that you've been doing on the psychology and the tagging, you've also been approached several times by the media to comment on shark attacks. How did that come about, and what have you learned through those experiences?
So it started off in 2008 where we actually had a fatal shark bite right here in San Diego. And of course, there's only a handful of people in San Diego that study sharks and could offer some sort of perspective. And so a lot of us were approached by local media to just give some commentary. And so that's kind of how it started. And then over time, you know, it went from local media to being sought out by media with greater reach nationally and also internationally. And so, although I may not be an expert in great whites or shark attacks per se, what I've learned is that, you know, the most useful thing that I can do is just to provide some perspective. You know, not to make light or to put aside what it could be a terrible accident when you think about the victims and their families, but just to try to keep, you know, statistics in mind. You know, what the risks are of, you know, being injured or killed and all these different things. And then just to remind people that, you know, there's no such thing as shark-infested waters. You know, we hear this cliche all the time, and it drives me crazy because the sharks live there, and you can't infest your own home. So, I mean, if we're going to say that the waters are infested with sharks, we have to say that they're equally infested with dolphins and seals and turtles. But we would never say that. So it just seems kind of absurd that we vilify sharks in that way. So whenever I'm asked to comment on a shark bite incident, I always try to, you know, just try to keep things in perspective and offer some sort of a level-headed comment that doesn't stir up panic.
You know, more like human-infested waters. So what programming have you actually been a part of or been on?
So I've been on the Weather Channel series Lifeguard. There was a few episodes there where they had some shark sightings and they had to close some beaches, and so they were interviewing me about that process and then local shark species, what the risk is, that kind of stuff. I was part of National Geographic Shark Fest, where we were on a program called Shocking Sharks with 2 colleagues here at Scripps. And then right now I'm also working with the BBC on a program called Big Blue Live, which is going to be happening this summer. So they're actually going to be coming to San Diego and trying to get some good aerial footage of the leopard sharks that I study, and I'll be offering some commentary about why they form these really large aggregations, these large groups close to shore.
Interesting. Well, really looking forward to what comes out of all that. You mentioned Shark Fest. Can you briefly tell us a little bit about what that's all about from your perspective?
Well, up to about 2 years ago when we did this show, I hadn't even heard of Shark Fest, but as I understand it now, it's basically National Geographic's alternative to Discovery Channel's Shark Week. And to my knowledge, it seems to be quite a bit more focused on science and not so much on shark attacks, which seems to have been Shark Week's focus for so long. This year is definitely an improvement, but I think that more improvement can be made.
Well, you know, we're definitely looking forward to any type of really great shark programming that focuses more on the science and love and concentration on the conservation of these animals. So really great that you have been out there talking about shark attacks, and doing the work that you've been doing. we will definitely keep an eye out for what you've been working on and what you will continue to work on and try to spread it through our channel. Right now, I'm going to throw it over to our next guest. Jim Toomey is the creator of the popular syndicated comic strip Sherman's Lagoon, which features a poetic turtle, a opportunistic crab, and of course Sherman, the great white shark. Welcome to the Hangout, Jim.
Hey, thanks.
So, where did Sherman's Lagoon come from? How did you get interested in ocean and lagoon topics?
Oh, when I was a kid, I was really into the ocean. I grew up near the coast and spent a lot of time at the coast, so I associated it with fun and vacations and so forth. But the comic strip really started probably when I was maybe 12 or 13. I took a trip to the Bahamas, and I was flying low over the Bahamas in a small airplane, and it was a life-changing experience for me, because prior to that I had really only seen the ocean as kind of this blue-gray veneer from the beach, and when you see it from the air, especially shallow water with a lot of coral reefs and wildlife, you see the ocean as a landscape in a wilderness. And so it really changed my perspective of the ocean. So it sort of planted a seed in my head that, well, the ocean could be a great platform for all kinds of things. It could be a platform for movies and comic strips, and you could have characters and settings and all kinds of rich experiences, artistic experiences in the ocean. So that's kind of where it started when I was a kid. I didn't really start the strip till I was in my late 20s. Got tired of my regular job and got back into cartooning.
Well, that's fantastic. I know that I myself and a couple of people on this panel are especially glad that you kept up with it. Sherman is a really great shark, and the rest of the crew in Sherman's Lagoon are really fantastic. Been loving the stories, but I have to ask, Sherman's not a very scary shark. In fact, he's rather friendly. Why did you prefer this portrayal of sharks?
Well, sharks are misunderstood. I think we can all agree on that. And the misunderstood character is a fascinating character to me from a writer's perspective, because it can inject a lot of drama. It can inject a lot of humor into a situation when the audience doesn't quite understand a character. So a shark for me was the perfect lead character for my comic strip. Couple that with my just infatuation with sharks, and that's the reason I chose it as a lead character. But I like the fact that you take a character that has all of this cultural baggage associated with it, and then you sort of, create a character that bucks that trend, that goes against that stereotype. To me, that's entertaining, and I think it's engaging for an audience. And it's a little bit, it's educational as well, because the popular image of sharks, as we all have pointed out, is unfair. It's based on, hundreds of years, if not thousands of years of just fear, and we need to turn a corner there. So we do that through education, we do it through art, and we do it through life experience. So I'm trying to do it a little bit through the art channel.
Well, that's fantastic. I honestly never really thought of Sherman as a rebel, but he definitely is rebelling against that image. You mentioned trying to educate and help with this image of sharks through the different medium. Do you think that your fans resonate with a friendly shark, and why do you think this is, besides what you just kind of went over?
Well, yes and no. I think a lot of people. I gradually evolved Sherman away from the stereotype shark, cartoon shark, the sort of the gag-a-day shark eats man kind of humor that I was into years ago. I evolved him into more of a, maybe not a thoughtful character, but a little bit more complex. And I just got really tired of writing the shark eats man gags every day. So what I get is a lot of requests to do that from some of my older fans, my more longtime fans. who seem to be disappointed that I'm not continually, writing that kind of gag. And yeah, so I think maybe some of the fans who have picked up the strip more recently and know that the lead character is really maybe more of a person with a shark costume on, they enjoy the strip the way it's written now.
In fact, you use the strip rather well in education, and right now you're working with Discovery on a series where you're introducing sharks. Can you talk a little bit about this?
Sure. I'm actually doing a couple of things on their website, not their television, because it seems like their website is a little bit more conservation focused. The TV, although it has evolved from years past, there was a moratorium on false documentaries that went away overnight, but the blood and guts part of Discovery is still alive and well, although maybe toned down this year. The folks who run their website seem to have a little bit more license, maybe because they have a smaller audience. I don't know. It's an audience that I suppose that where you have the luxury of providing text and a lot of context and a lot of information to support what you're talking about. So I'm working with the web developers on a couple of different things. One is Shark Myths, where they came up with top 10 myths that people think about sharks, and I illustrated cartoons to complement those. And then I offered to devote this week's Sherman's Lagoon's comic strips to more, general shark education. They're a little bit more didactic than your typical series, less of a story and more of, the shark a day kind of thing. I think the one you just showed was the cookie cutter shark. I did one on, what else did I do? The goblin shark, for example. So there's the theme of this week's comic strips is really sharks you've never heard of. So I think that's kind of fun.
Honestly, you actually touched on two of my favorite sharks with that, so thank you very much. No, Cookie Cutter and Goblin are two really awesome, really weird sharks, and they're really fantastic. In fact, I believe Goblin Shark is a deep-sea rare shark that is probably up more Paul's bailiwick than mine. I have to ask one last question before I go on to the next one. You're as you just mentioned, you're covering Shark a Day, going over shark myths. You've covered issues like ocean acidification, overfishing, and there was even a series, I believe, where Sherman's fins were stolen. Has your strip ever been, do you see your strip as an effective means of spreading these messages and enacting change? Like, what do you see your reach as?
I think in the grand scheme of things, it's not that powerful. I think what I bring to the party maybe is I bring an audience that otherwise wouldn't probably avail themselves to this kind of information. People who probably wouldn't read an article about sharks, or who wouldn't even sit through a Shark Week show. Comic strips, they take 20 seconds to read. They're read by very old people, very young people, conservatives, liberals. So I think my comic strip goes out to maybe a broader audience than, say, a Shark Week show or an editorial in the New York Times. So I do bring that different audience to the mix. But is it as powerful as other media? Is it as powerful as a film? Probably not. No. But there's different ways to spread the word, and you can spread it poignantly and effectively through to maybe a narrow audience, or you can pick a shorter message that's maybe a little bit more entertainment oriented and cast a wider net. So that's kind of what I try to do with the strip.
Well, I gotta say, thank you for entertaining and educating me all these years reading your comics at my father's breakfast table. So, thank you again for all the work you're doing, and thank you for being on our Hangout. With this, I'm actually going to move on to our next guest, who's joining us from the field. a shark researcher at Stanford's Hopkins Marine Station, Taylor Chappell.
Great, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being on. Can you tell us a little bit about what your work and research focuses on?
Yeah, I am a researcher of really a whole slew of different species of sharks. My main focus is on white sharks, and I do a lot of, mostly what I do is population biology, so the questions of how many sharks are out there and if these populations are healthy or if they're sort of in jeopardy. But we also run the gamut, so I'll do physiology and behavior. As Paul said, yeah, everybody knows that white sharks jump out of the water. But what I'm interested in is how they do that. So how does an animal that's 3,000 or 4,000 pounds go from 0 to 25 miles per hour in just a few seconds? And what actual power does its tail have to do that? We also do a lot of work with conservation, and I think Andrew mentioned some of the statistics about attacks and how unlikely you are. In just a few hours from now, we have a paper that's going to come out. Unfortunately, it's an embargo right now, so I can't really talk about it. But at 9 o'clock, if anybody Googles my last name and shark attacks, our paper that really talks to the truth about shark attacks and the real risk versus the perceived risk, which end up being very different. So that's sort of the general scope of the research that I do. Well,
thank you for that teaser. Where are you actually calling in from? Where are you in the field?
So right now, of all places, I'm in Montana, and so I guess the part that I didn't really get to is that a lot of the work that I do is it's on the physiology. So it's looking at how animals move in space and what causes an animal to go, whether it's a shark or it's a seal, or in this case it's a bird. So the same concepts that I use on white sharks and why and how they're moving and doing these predatory actions or just their movements for gestation. I'm looking at those same things in birds. So the same techniques that we use in the ocean, we can use pretty much anywhere else.
Fantastic. Why is you mentioned that part of your research is on whites and great whites. It seems like everybody is fascinated by great white sharks and kind of ignores some of the other sharks that are out there, such as cookie cutter, goblin, or lantern sharks, what have you. What is the appeal of the great white shark, do you think?
I think it comes down to fear. People are they are really captured or fascinated by things that fear them, and so predators become really popular. Things like lions and tigers and cheetahs. And white sharks are these amazing predators. But I think what I'm fascinated about and what I'm trying to bring people to be fascinated about is that they're not these one-dimensional animals. Sharks are not one-dimensional. White sharks are definitely not. They have these amazing behaviors. They have migrations that take them thousands of miles, and they come back to these pinpoint locations. They have diving behaviors that are unique to individuals that we're finding out. So I think it's much like Paul says about many of the species that he looks for, is that people should be fascinated by what's really interesting and unique about these animals, not that we have some innate or some fear of them.
Well, I mean, you mentioned a whole bunch of predators, in fact, apex predators, and great white shark, obviously, and most sharks are the apex predator in their ecosystem. What is the current state of, say, the apex predator of the great white shark, and what would happen to an ecosystem if that suddenly disappeared?
Yeah, so white sharks are the apex predator. They're at the top. I guess someone might argue that killer whales are at the top, but for the moment we'll just say white sharks are at the top. And so what they do is they provide the stability for the system underneath them. So they'll regulate the seal populations, and that in turn will regulate the salmon or the sardine or anchovies, and that goes on down the line. And so the great thing about white sharks is that if you have a community that supports a healthy population of white sharks, you have as a good indicator that your entire population or your entire ecosystem has some sense of balance to it. And right now with white sharks, for the most part, we're not sure. So some of the work I did was to produce the first estimates of of subadults and adults in Central California. And we found that there's actually only a few hundred of these subadults and adults. And that was our first step. So we don't have a real grasp anywhere in the world, really, of what the population trends are. So a few hundred white sharks might be a totally healthy population, but it may be a signs of a declining population. So our next steps for me, myself, and our group, and sort of the community at large, is to look at those trends and see how the populations really are doing.
So I would imagine that has a lot to do with tagging and visual data. And Andrew kind of, Andrew kind of mentioned this earlier about satellite imagery or above imagery, which I believe could also be obtained through, say, like a drone or what have you, and the effect of tagging. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of this in your research?
Yeah, absolutely. So with tagging, there's a few different types of tags, and they really has been a fast evolution. And so the first ones were just a little tag that you put in an animal, and hopefully you recatch that animal, and you know that it's been alive for a certain period of time, or it moved from point A to point B. But as time's gone along, technology has moved forward. We now have tags that will track an animal through time, wherever it goes. They'll look at specific behaviors. And so for us, these are incredible tools, because animals that are in the ocean are, for the majority of their lifetime, are away from where we can observe them. So we use satellite tags to archive the diving behaviors and the large-scale migrations of these animals. More recently, we've been using tags that have accelerometers and magnetometers built in, sort of the same things that are in your smartphone that flip the screen for you. That information that they collect will come back to us and tell us about how the animal is moving through the water, how many times it beats its tail. It gives us the information about how a white shark gets itself out of the water, and then sort of back to the metabolic cost of swimming and how much an animal has to eat and things like that. So these tags are really the cornerstone of what we do as scientists.
That sounds like a lot of data, and a lot of data that we might not have had access to, say, even like 5 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow, that's fantastic. Before I move on to questions from the audience, I got to ask, what is one of the most interesting things you've learned about sharks through your research?
Well, that's a bad question to ask at the end, because I could take this on forever. The first thing I think is that the population abundances were really low, but since that initial sort of shock to me, the most interesting thing is that sharks are incredibly dynamic, and they are, we see Shark Week videos of sharks at the surface biting onto baits and doing things like that, but there's 99.9% of the time they're doing totally different things. They're migrating thousands of kilometers offshore and coming back. And so I think the idea that they're not mindless killing machines, but they're actually these incredibly complex, important parts of our marine systems, is really the most interesting thing that I've learned.
Well, that's really interesting, and I've got to say, if you had to choose one thing to share with us, I was very glad that you shared that. As a shark researcher, we've got quite a few people that we've interacted with, got a bunch of people on this panel. I'm sure each and every single one of you could add something interesting to that list. But since we've already touched upon the fact that sharks kind of get a bad rap in the media, let's go with the opposite. What is something cute about sharks that you want to share with the world? Vicky, I'd love to throw it to you.
Okay, great. My favorite cute thing about sharks are cat shy sharks. So when they get scared, if you were a fisherman and you put them onto your deck, they'd basically curl up and try to cover their eyes with their tails. Similarly, when swell sharks get scared, they literally swell up. And I think those are pretty funny, adorable defenses. So that's mine.
Perfect. Andy, what about you? Oh, sorry. Give me 1 second. You're currently on mute. And now you're gone. Let's actually go.
Okay, I'm back.
All right, there you go.
Yeah, so something cute. I think it's pretty funny to watch leopard sharks feed in captivity. We actually often feed them just whole frozen mackerel. And frozen mackerel could be about this long, probably about 8 to 10 inches. And so a lot of times the leopard sharks, they're kind of like dogs. They'll just they'll bite at it kind of perpendicularly right in the middle of the fish, and they'll kind of shake it around, and they'll swim away from the other sharks so they don't get it. And then they, once they're kind of in their corner of their tank, they'll find a way to manipulate the fish and get it in kind of long ways. So in some ways, I think sharks kind of remind me of dogs in some ways.
Fantastic. There's actually quite a lot of animals that remind me of dogs. I never really thought of sharks as dogs, but I guess I don't have that much direct interaction with them. Paul, I'd love to get your input. What is something cute about sharks that you see in the field?
Well, Vicky absolutely took mine. Those guys, they're adorable, the shy sharks. But another cute one are the horn sharks, because they're kind of they're small. They have these cute little piggy noses, but they lay egg cases that are, it's a capsule. They have like this spiral kind of screw around the outside, and the females, when they lay the egg cases, they actually pick them up in their mouths, and they find a nice crevice that they stick them into. That way predators can't pull them out. Sharks usually don't take care of their young at all, so this is kind of the most motherly thing that they have.
Oh, interesting. Jim, do you have any input on cute activities with sharks that you've seen from the work you've done and the research you've done?
Well, I'm not a marine biologist, so I'm a cartoonist. I think it's cute that sharks snore. No, in all seriousness, they, I think, sharks, well, tiger sharks, the young eat each other in the womb. I think that's kind of cute, isn't it? No?
I want to be so close to you, I'm going to eat you up. I definitely hear that. It might have been a little unfair, but I thought that maybe with some of the research you've done for your comic strip, you might have come across something that hit you as a little bit interesting or cute.
Right.
You want to think on it for a little bit?
Yeah, let me think about that.
All right, let's shoot it over to Taylor. Taylor, what's something cute that you've seen in your work?
I think I'm probably on the same page with Jim there. I think working with white sharks a lot, I'm not sure that phrase comes up very often. So I go with majestic in that realm, but cute I'm not sure really applies all that much.
I don't know. I mean, you even got an entire species of shark known as the nurse shark, and that to me just seems very cute. The concept of a shark nursing an entire little, nursery. Again, just trying to help sharks get a little bit of a better rap than being these mindless predators that they're all around. I gotta throw it to the audience real quick, since Jim, I kind of threw you a little bit aside on that. I got a question from Facebook. The personality of Jim seems, as you mentioned, like a person in a shark. Personality of Sherman seems like a person in a shark suit. Was there any person that was an inspiration for his personality?
Yeah, for Sherman, it's probably me. Really, I mean, when you write fiction, when you invent a character, a lot of what the character's thinking and saying is really what you're thinking and saying, obviously through a screen, through a mask. So, Sherman's my dumb side, and I've got a pretty big dumb side, the kind of dumb person who says bring an entire dinner party to a standstill by saying something stupid. So, I channel a lot of that, my personality, through Sherman that way. And Fillmore the Sea Turtle is a little bit like that too. I've got maybe a bookish side. So Sherman's based on me, sad to say.
You know what's funny? I was watching this documentary on Big Bird, and no, you laughed, but I'm forgetting his name, but the Muffateer also does Oscar the Grouch, and he says that it's two sides of his personality that he just lets push out there. Because if you think about it, Big Bird and Oscar are kind of total opposites, and in a way, Sherman and I always forget the turtle's name. Thank you, Fillmore. The turtle, seem a little bit not polar opposites, but definitely different aspects of possibly the same personality. So you're in some really awesome company with that practice. I gotta ask the panel, what would your ideal shark programming be? Something that's already on Shark Week or Shark Fest. Let's just throw it out there. You have the ability to create whatever you want. What would that be? Andy, I'm going to throw it to you since you're first on my little queue here.
So I think my ideal show would just be an hour of just the most amazing footage of sharks doing all kinds of different behaviors, just showcasing the diversity of sharks, pure science, no shark attacks, and just beautiful, uplifting music. I just want to watch for an hour and just be stunned and mystified. And I have yet to see something like that. So that would be my ideal show right there.
Gotcha. That actually sounds pretty nice. Just to sit back, relax, watch awesome sharks. Taylor, what about you?
This isn't a shameless promotion. It's legitimate, but we actually did a film with Shark Week in 2012 called White Shark Highway, or Great White Highway, and it was with the same producer who did Gorillas in the Mist, and I think it was the first time that I had seen Shark Week ever, or in a long time, bring science back in, and it was a show. It was about white sharks, but it was about the science behind, I guess, the science behind all of our interest in research. And for me, that was a great sort of mix of really the science and the beauty of the animals. There were no, I guess there was one shot of a shark eating a seal in a full hour. So for me, that was pretty good, especially for Shark Week.
That is definitely a good proportion compared to the average. Vicki, what about you? What is your ideal shark programming that you would love to see happen?
So Taylor kind of stole a third of my answer. Basically, the partnership that Ocean Research Foundation and myself have with this Google Hangout is that I was helping pick the guest. And so every single person, excluding myself, has been somehow doing shows or something shark-related that is somehow positive. So Shocking Sharks with Andrew, just talking about cool ways that sharks eat. I don't know if anyone's seen, Jim Toomey has these really awesome 2-minute videos about different ocean issues, but they're really fun and entertaining. I show the ocean acidification one to kids all the time. And then, of course, alien sharks. We have the third one now featuring, Paul and my professor. The other reason that I liked the Great White Highway that Taylor Chappell was in is because it's also one of, from what I counted, 2 programs that I could find that featured a woman scientist, someone that was predominantly featured. I tried last year to do a very intense count of what I could find from Shark Week on Netflix, and other than Dr. Barbara Block, I found one with Dr. Michelle Heipel, and I believe there was one with Dirty Jobs on Greenland sharks where there was a graduate student who got to talk a lot. Other than that, I think I found about 2 other women, and so my ideal shows would be focusing more on these lesser-known sharks, showing more women, showing more people of color, just showing the true diversity that's out there with the shark stuff.
Fantastic response. I don't know if I could go through all that research, but I also want to mention that you mentioned Jim's short videos. Don't forget, those are award-winning. Like, you've won multiple awards for those, including, I believe, 1 or 2 at the Blue Ocean Film Festival last year. So, actually, let's throw it over to Jim. What would you love to see shark programming-wise?
Well, I think I can think of 2 things. One that probably wouldn't have much of an audience, and one that I think you could get a pretty good audience for. And I think Andy hit it a little bit with if you tell the audience about how beautiful they are, but also maybe how complex they are and how they fit into the ecosystem. Somebody brought up the point, I forget who, that the apex predators have such a key role in the overall ecosystem health. That would be difficult, I think, to hold an audience for. But I think you could hold an audience in a show about how sharks, like other animals, are complex. They interact. They even have a little bit of a social life. So if you make sharks more of a living thing rather than an eating machine, I think you'll cultivate a lot more political will and popularity to promote shark conservation and pass more laws to conserve sharks. So I'd like to see a show that just surprised people with how complex and socially interactive sharks are as a species.
That would be really cool. Paul, I know that you have been on Shark Week twice now, I believe. But besides alien sharks, what would you love to see happen?
Well, yeah, I mean, my answer is going to sound biased, and it is. But when I was a kid, I loved, watching documentaries where you got to see strange new things. You got to learn a lot of facts. Lots of interesting material, whether it's a fact about their life histories or a fact about why they're important to the ecosystem, or if there's just something strange about this population of sharks. And just where at the end you feel like you learned something. So I think pretty much any any show where you get to see a lot of really cool stuff with sharks and you get to learn some stuff, and afterwards you feel like you walk away with something that you didn't have before you watched the show. That would make me really happy.
I think every show on Shark Week, Shark Fest, or anything that claims to represent educational material should have that same goal. I think that's a really great goal. We're at kind of the last little bit of our time here. We had a question from the audience which was about asking for advice for those looking for a career in shark research. Anyone want to cover that real quick before we go to final thoughts?
I'm happy to jump in. For me, I guess my biggest recommendation is to get involved. There's a panel of folks in front of you here that are doing incredible stuff, and the way to really get into it is to become part of that. Talk to any of the scientists that are around, see how you can get involved. There's lots of outreach. There's a number of different organizations that you don't have to be on the coast or working with the animals to help outreach about shark education and things like that. So that's, for me, I think would be the first step.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's really good advice for anybody trying to get into any field, but definitely I would, I'm going to go out on a limb here, but feel free to contact anybody on this panel with questions that you might have about shark research, about the research they're doing, or ways that you could possibly get involved in the ocean and shark community, or obviously ways to get involved with cartooning and following your dreams and getting out of the annoying job that you wanted to escape to go into something more awesome and impactful. And all together, I can imagine that your soul is a little bit better as that as well. I'm going to let everybody on the panel give a quick final thought before we sign off. This has been a really fantastic Shark Week Hangout. Really love having these fantastic guests, learning about the work they do, what their inspiration is, and each and every single one kind of laid out a little hint of something to come. So a lot of exciting things on the horizon. Andy, I'd love to give you, what is your final thoughts in regards to Shark Week, this panel, Shark Fest, and shark research?
Well, I think it's really easy for a lot of us to bash Shark Week. Definitely we're seeing improvements, and I think that there will continue to be improvements. But I think that the biggest benefit to come from all of this, especially with the advent of social media, is how aware people are about sharks. Even if they're not being portrayed in the most positive light, somehow I think that just the increased awareness is doing a lot of good for sharks, and the fact that people are watching this hangout now and who will watch the video later. These sorts of social medias are just great way to reach out to the public and get them involved.
Really fantastic. Paul, I'd love to get your perspective on this. Any final thoughts?
I mean, I really liked being back, so thank you again, Andrew. And I really liked meeting everybody on the panel. I like sharks because they're diverse, but we actually have a really diverse panel if you look at what each of us do. So it's kind of made me think, all of us are working with sharks, and that's year-round. Shark Week doesn't have to be just 1 week a year. We're always working. So anybody who is interested should absolutely hop in, try to work with sharks through one of these venues. I think, a lot of people like the ocean and sharks, and people ask me how they can get involved, and there's absolutely, if you look around, you can just get involved right now with sharks.
Really fantastic. Again, great advice, and I hope everybody out there does get a chance to not only watch your programming, but also get involved with the projects you're working on, and we'll help spread the word on that. Taylor, no problem. Taylor, I'd love to get your perspective on this. Final thoughts?
Yeah, I guess my final thought is just sort of hammering home sort of what I had said before, but just that, for Shark Week's a great opportunity for all of us, for everyone really, to educate more, to learn more, and to teach more. And so I think it's a great chance for all of us to get away from the idea or the thoughts of sharks and get down to the facts and what's really amazing about them and what's fascinating, not necessarily what makes good television, but what makes these animals incredibly captivating.
I, again, think that's a really great perspective and a really great approach for this. Jim, love to get your perspective on this.
Sure. Gosh, I'm going to echo two of the others by saying that Shark Week has been a phenomenal platform for that. There's certainly a negative aspect, I guess, to some of the programming, but the fact that everybody's riveted to the television and looking at and talking about sharks for a week it makes it, I think, easier in some ways for conservationists to get people's attention about that species. And I do see an evolution with Discovery to try to broaden the message a little bit. So hopefully those trends will continue.
Hopefully, we can only hope. And a lot of that hope has to come from demand. So remember, you at home, watch programming that's more about the shark science and shark conservation than the blood and guts assumptions of creatures that haven't existed for a very, very long time. Vicki, love to get your perspective. First of all, let me say thank you so much for helping me put together this panel. Love working with Ocean Research Foundation on this hangout, and looking forward to more work in the future. But for right now, your final thoughts.
Well, thanks. We had a lot of fun putting this together. My final thoughts are the Ocean Research Foundation is always looking for volunteers. You can find us on Facebook. We are always looking for people to help us with social media and outreach, just to amplify all these shark science facts that are constantly going out there. And in addition to that, we are also planning to expand our field work in San Francisco Bay, studying more of those sharks, partnering with Monterey Bay Aquarium and Stanford on that. So we could really use some help spreading whatever it is we figure out while we're out there. So
really great. Happy to help spread the word. Really looking forward to all the work that you're going to be doing with Ocean Research Foundation. Again, want to thank all of my awesome panelists for joining today. Thank you for being a part of, helping to give sharks a better rep and helping everybody learn more about sharks. For those of you watching at home, don't forget that you can keep on participating and contact anybody involved on this panel, or ask us questions directly of how you can get involved. We can definitely help you out. So let's go out there, help out with sharks, making them a little bit better understood in the public, and not so much the what they've been portrayed. Thank you again for watching. Until next time, get on out there into the ocean.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Andy.